She went missing on Sunday the 26th of May at about 7:30 p.m. We have charged 22-year-old Jamie Reynolds with the murder of Georgie Williams.
The evening sun was setting over Wellington as 17-year-old Georgia Williams kissed her parents goodbye and stepped out of her family home. It was 7:30 p.m. on Sunday, May 26, 2013, a time that would forever be etched in the memories of those who loved her. The former head girl and daughter of a West Mercia Air Force officer was heading to what she believed would be a simple photo shoot with friends. Her parents watched her leave, expecting her to return later that night. They didn't know it would be the last time they'd see their daughter alive. Detective Inspector Mark Reynolds stood before the press, his voice carrying a weight of urgency. "I want to speak directly to Georgia."
People to work in a consistent way. You've got to have standard processes and standard procedures, and if you can digitize those.
Georgia's story began on September 7, 1995, in the rolling hills of Shropshire, England. From her earliest days, she showed an extraordinary spark. Intelligent, caring, and perpetually surrounded by the warmth of her tight-knit family. Her father, Stephen, a respected police officer, mother Lynette, and older sister Scarlett created a loving cocoon around her. In their family home, laughter was constant, and dreams were encouraged to soar. The walls of her bedroom told the story of an achiever. Certificates marking straight A's, a prestigious head girl badge, and her proudly worn Air Training Corps uniform. Georgia's dream was crystal clear. She would become a Royal Air Force paramedic, saving lives from the skies. Her infectious smile and boundless enthusiasm made her impossible not to love, whether she was excelling in sports or simply being there for a friend in need. When she turned 16, Georgia took her first step into the working world, landing a part-time position at a local petrol station. It was there she met Jamie Reynolds, a quiet 23-year-old who had attended school with her sister Scarlett. To most, he seemed unremarkable, polite, reserved, the kind of person who faded into the background. But Reynolds harbored an obsession that would prove fatal. His infatuation with Georgia was obvious to everyone. Despite her gentle rejection of his romantic advances, Georgia's empathetic nature wouldn't allow her to ostracize him. Her own experiences with childhood bullying had left her with a deep understanding of feeling like an outsider. "Everyone deserves kindness," she once told a friend, a philosophy that tragically played into Reynolds's sinister plans. Reynolds crafted his facade carefully. He spoke passionately about photography, painting himself as an aspiring artist trapped in a dead-end job. Georgia, ever supportive, agreed to help with his portfolio. The plan was set for May 26, 2013, a group photo shoot at Reynolds' parents' house. Georgia would pose alongside her friends, or so she thought. That Sunday evening, as her family gathered for a barbecue, Georgia checked her phone one last time before leaving. "I'll be back later," she called out, her voice carrying across the garden. Responsible and reliable as always, she headed out to Jamie's house just a short distance away. Her parents had no reason to worry. They knew Jamie, had welcomed him into their home, and trusted their daughter's judgment. After all, Georgia wasn't going alone. Other friends would be there too. What they didn't know was that Reynolds had carefully orchestrated this moment. There would be no group photo shoot, no friends waiting at his house. As Georgia walked toward what she thought was an innocent gathering, she was walking into a carefully laid trap. The minutes crept into hours as the Williams family waited for Georgia's return. The Sunday evening sky had long since darkened when Lynette, following maternal instinct, sent a text to her daughter. The reply came swiftly. The photo shoot was over, but Georgia would be staying with friends. The message ended with her trademark 3 kisses, a small detail that would later haunt investigators. Dawn broke over Wellington, painting the sky in shades of gray. Lynette, after a restless night, climbed the stairs to George's room at 6 a.m. The sight of the untouched bed sent a chill through her body. Another text was sent, another reply received. Georgia had lost track of time, stayed with friends, her phone battery dying. The words were there, but something felt wrong. The message lacked Georgia's usual warmth, her characteristic consideration for others' feelings. This wasn't the Georgia they knew. This was a girl who had never missed checking in, who took pride in being responsible. Her upcoming plans stood as silent witnesses to the irregularity of her absence. A much-anticipated music festival ticket lay unused on her dresser, and her first driving lesson, something she'd talked about for weeks, would go unattended. By Tuesday morning, the weight of 48 hours of silence had become unbearable. Panic, no longer a creeping sensation but a full-blown reality, spurred her parents into action. Phone calls to Georgia's friends yielded nothing but growing dread. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. Her phone, once a lifeline, now rang straight to voicemail, each unanswered call amplifying their fears. Matthew, Georgia's boyfriend, took to Facebook, his desperate appeal spreading through the digital sphere like wildfire. Missing, Georgia Williams, last seen Sunday evening. Please, anyone with information, contact her family. The post would be shared thousands of times, each share representing a prayer for her safe return. But it was when the Williams family approached the police that the investigation took a dark turn. The mention of Jamie Reynolds' name set off immediate alarm bells within the force. As officers pulled his file, a disturbing pattern emerged from the pages of his past. 2008, a 16-year-old girl, lured under false pretenses of a school project, fighting for her life as 17-year-old Reynolds attempted to strangle her. The incident, treated with a final warning, would prove to be just the tip of a very dark iceberg. Behind the quiet, polite facade that Reynolds presented to the world lay a troubled mind that had long concerned mental health professionals. His parents had raised red flags about their son's obsession with violent pornography and snuff films, dark materials depicting rape and asphyxiation. More disturbing still were the drawings discovered in his possession. Innocent images of schoolgirls defaced with carefully drawn nooses around their necks. The youth offending team and mental health services had seen enough to determine Reynolds posed a significant risk. Yet, somehow, tragically, the case had been deemed suitably resolved by police, a bureaucratic phrase that would come to haunt the force. Even a 2011 incident, where Reynolds deliberately crashed his car into that of a female colleague who had rejected his advances, failed to trigger the intervention that might have saved Georgia's life. The pattern was clear. Rejection triggered violence, and Reynolds' obsessions were escalating. As investigators pieced together these disturbing fragments of Reynolds' history, the clock continued ticking. Somewhere in Wellington, Georgia, Williams' fate hung in the balance, while a man with a documented history of violence and obsession held the answers to her disappearance. The investigation accelerated as digital breadcrumbs began revealing Reynolds' movements. CCTV cameras and automatic number plate recognition systems painted a chilling picture. Reynolds' van, had traveled nearly 300 miles north to Glasgow, Scotland. Georgia was nowhere to be seen. Security footage captured him in a car park, methodically changing clothes beside his van, a seemingly mundane act that investigators would later recognize as an attempt to destroy evidence. When Police Scotland took Reynolds into custody, he presented the same quiet, polite demeanor that had fooled so many before. "I know nothing about Georgia's whereabouts," he insisted, his voice steady, his eyes betraying nothing. But investigators, now armed with knowledge of his violent past, saw through the facade. He was transferred back to Shropshire, where his steady denials continued against mounting evidence. At 5:30 a.m., in that cruel hour before dawn, when the worst news always seems to come, senior officers approached the Williams family home. Stephen and Lynette Williams would later say they knew the truth before a word was spoken. They could read it in the officers' faces. Their beautiful Georgia was gone. The investigation team descended upon Reynolds' house, the last place Georgia had been seen alive. What they discovered would shake even hardened officers to their core. A camera, hastily wiped, but not thoroughly enough, held the horrific truth of Georgia's final moments. The memory card told a story so grotesque that seasoned detectives had to step away from their screens. The images revealed Reynolds' methodical depravity. Georgia, trusting and kind to the end, had been positioned on a box, a noose around her neck. The next image showed the box kicked away, Georgia suspended, while Reynolds, now playing photographer instead of friend, documented her death. But even this wasn't enough. He violated her body after death, capturing each moment with his camera, creating a trophy collection of his unspeakable acts. Yet, Reynolds, now charged with murder, continued his psychological games. Detective Sergeant Hopwood, veteran of countless interrogations, recognized the pattern. Reynolds was savoring his power, refusing to reveal Georgia's final resting place, forcing her family to endure additional torture of not being able to lay their daughter to rest. The CCTV footage continued to fill in the timeline, each new discovery more disturbing than the last. The day after Georgia's murder, Reynolds was captured on camera at a petrol station, calmly filling his van with fuel. Inside that same van lay Georgia's body, hidden from the world while her killer performed the mundane tasks of daily life. In a twist of particularly cruel irony, Reynolds then drove 60 miles to Wrexham, Wales, where he stopped at a cinema. The film he chose? Fast and Furious, the very same movie he had been trying to convince Georgia to watch with him. He sat in the darkness of the theater, surrounded by unknowing moviegoers, while his victim lay in his van in the parking lot. With Reynolds in custody but still refusing to cooperate, police made a public appeal. Detective Inspector Mark Reynolds stood before the cameras again, this time gesturing to a van parked nearby. "We urgently need information about this vehicle, a silver transit van, registration CX06ASV. The van, once an unremarkable sight on Wellington streets, had become a crucial piece of evidence in unraveling Georgia's final journey. "We have a critical 5.5-hour window," Detective Inspector Reynolds announced to the press, his voice tight with urgency. "Our suspect's van was spotted in Wrexham at 5 p.m., then reappeared in Queensferry, Cheshire at 10:30 p.m., heading north. We need to account for every minute of that gap." The breakthrough came from ordinary citizens who had shown kindness to a killer. Several people stepped forward, recounting how they'd helped Reynolds when his van became stuck. Their Good Samaritan acts, intended to help a stranded motorist, had unknowingly intersected with the murderer's desperate attempts to hide his crime. As investigators converged on the location these witnesses described, they knew they were about to write the final chapter of their search for Georgia. On May 31, 2013, 5 days after Georgia's disappearance, police made the discovery they had dreaded. In a woodland area near Wrexham, barely concealed from view, lay Georgia's body. She had been stripped of both clothes and dignity, discarded by the man who had once claimed to be her friend. The halls of Stafford Crown Court would provide the setting for justice on December 2, 2013. Stephen Williams, Georgia's father, watched Reynolds carefully before the proceedings began. The killer's behavior was telling, laughing and joking in the holding area, showing the true face of a man unburdened by conscience. But as the courtroom doors opened, Reynolds transformed, adopting a meek, childlike demeanor. One last performance for the judge and jury. The guilty plea came as a surprise to many, but brought a measure of relief to the Williams family, sparing them the trauma of a trial. On December 19th, Justice Wilkes delivered the sentence that would define Reynolds' future. The sentence I pass is one of life imprisonment. The early release provisions are not to apply to you. I make a whole life order. Reynolds, at that moment, became one of the youngest prisoners in British criminal history to receive a whole life order, a sentence reserved for the most dangerous offenders, meaning he would never walk free again. His 2014 appeal was dismissed with unprecedented swiftness, the Court of Appeals stating that no argument could possibly justify reconsidering such a fitting sentence. The case's aftermath brought substantial changes to West Mercia Police. 6 officers received misconduct notices regarding their handling of Reynolds' 2008 attack, a recognition that George's death might have been prevented had earlier warnings been heeded properly. But from this darkness, light emerged. The community that had searched for Georgia now united to honor her memory. More than 2,000 thalers was raised for a memorial bench, a quiet place of remembrance in the town she loved. Her family, channeling their grief into purpose, established the Georgia Williams Trust, a charity dedicated to helping young people pursue their dreams through grants and partnerships. This charitable work seemed a fitting tribute to Georgia, the straight-A student, the head girl, the aspiring RAF paramedic whose life was cut tragically short at 17. The trust ensures that while Georgia's dreams were stolen from her, other young people would receive help in achieving theirs. In the end, Georgia Williams' story became more than a tragic, true crime narrative. It became a catalyst for change in police procedures, a reminder of the importance of taking early warning signs seriously, and through her trust, a legacy of hope and opportunity for future generations. The passionate, vibrant, and spirited Georgia Williams lives on through every young person who receives support to pursue their dreams, dreams that she herself was never allowed to fulfill.